Well, let's speak to the ANC's NEC member, Fébé Potgieter, who formed part, of course, of the negotiating team that would have set up this government of national unity. She's joining us for reaction. Mark, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. It's the ANC that is violating the letter and the spirit of the statement of intent via the actions of its president. Is this a sign of a crack, or is this the true test of the resilience of the government of national unity?
Well, I think it certainly is testimony to our constitution, which says that all laws that are made should go through a proper process. The Bela Bill has gone through that process. It went through Parliament. Over 5,000 submissions, public hearings were held, petitions were submitted, and at the end of the day, the Parliament passed it. The President has a constitutional obligation to sign into law unless there's his legal advisors advise that there's a constitutional reason why he shouldn't. It went through the process after Parliament passed the bill in May. And hence the president is ready to sign it. Yeah. Now, the representative from the party that you just quoted talks about the fact that we must act in the interests of the GNU. We must act in the interests of South Africa, because that's what the government of national unity is about, and that's what the statement of intent is about. And if one look at what the Bela Bill is trying to do, 28 years after the passing of the South African Schools Act, there's a need for a number of reforms. Our country has changed. We have learned what work or not, and there are certain challenges that's for real within the schooling system. For example, one of the things that the Bela Bill does is to focus on the question about dropouts. Yes. By introducing compulsory grade R, and already 97% of our children are of 6 years old are receiving ECD, but it's now compulsory, and therefore the state has an obligation to make sure that there's resources, proper resources available for ECD.
I want to come back to that, because I saw you doing a good infographic of dispelling some of the myths. So I'm going to go through them one by one so that you help me understand. But I want to just stay a little bit with the formation of this GNU and get rid of the politics part of it, and then we'll get to the educational side of it. Was the DA completely clear during the formation of the GNU and the signing of the statement of intent that they completely reject things like the Bela Bill, the NHI, and we are hearing, for example, from the address by John Steenhuisen today, some of the other things, including they are making proposals around cost-saving mechanisms at Treasury and so on and so forth. And was the ANC okay with I suppose, that kind of posturing from them?
Well, certainly those issues are not within the statement of intent. The issues that parties agree to are in the statement of intent, and then there was an approach an understanding that parties have different views about certain issues. I mean, we were aware way before the negotiations around the government of national unity started that the DA was against the NHI as well as certain clauses within the Bela Bill. But I think that at the end of the day, Parliament that passed the law was elected. Yeah. The DA and others had the opportunity to make their inputs, and certainly a number of changes were made in the process of the public hearings, of engagements by political parties on the Bela Bill. So they had the opportunity to do that, and of course there's recourse for them. They can go to the courts and challenge the constitutionality of certain clauses or the bill as a whole. I think that our system is quite robust, that allow for when parties or specific sections of our community don't agree with a particular policy, they have the right to take it to the constitutional court.
Yeah. So as the ANC, you wouldn't be at any point in this process now be opened, it seems, to another round of public participation, because I think what the Democratic Alliance is now trying to do...
The Bela Bill has been in the making for the last 10 years. Yeah. And in fact, it dates back to 2013 when a review was done of the South African Schools Act, which at the moment governs all our schools and schooling. So to keep on delaying, when we went through this extensive process, because a certain section of our population feel that it doesn't work for them. I mean, I think it's a bit unfortunate. Something that we need to properly fund and resource ECD and make sure that all children have a basic foundation by making grade R compulsory. That is something that we shouldn't be postponing. We need to get on with the work. The issues around language policies, the issues around compulsory schooling, the question about how do you prevent children from dropping out of school, and the responsibilities of parents as well as the responsibilities of educators in that regard. All of those things are critical to education. And I think that we need to get on with the job. And I think that the president, according to the ANC, and we support the position that the presidency has taken to sign the Bela Bill into law tomorrow.
So let's firstly then get around these issues. We're going to go through some of these issues, mandatory grade R admission policy. They're saying, right, one of the first things that they're saying is that the bill in its current form doesn't address, for example, 8 areas of concern that address the systemic issues that impede quality of education. And I want to count them. 1, it does not address overcrowding. 2, it doesn't address curriculum failure. 3, it doesn't address poor literacy. 4, it doesn't address numeracy rates. 5, it doesn't address dropout rate. It doesn't address unsafe and unsanitary facilities. 7, it doesn't address poor quality teaching. And 8, it doesn't address a lack of resources. What do you say to that claim?
Yeah. Okay, it's a bit surprising that those very valid points are being raised at this point in the process, but nonetheless, if one look at the entire legal landscape of schooling, then the Bela Bill address aspects of it. For example, curriculum is dealt with through the curriculum policy statement, which is a separate piece of legislation and policy that deals with curriculum. So issues with regards to curriculum reform, there's, for example, a commission that's been looking at the history curriculum in schools. There's a regular look at issues around mathematics teaching and science teaching and so forth. So a lot of the issues, and I mean, the other issue that they mentioned is this question about infrastructure. There is the policy that's in place to look at what are the minimum requirements with regards to which every school should have, and then that is supposed to be updated on a regular basis. So the Bela Bill is not the totality of the education reform that's needed. There's other pieces of the puzzle that look at the issues that the DA is talking about. I mean, for example, the question about school dropout. There's a whole myriad of reasons why children drop out of school. And what the Bela Bill does is to address components of that. For example, one of them is to do with a question about ECD. So early childhood development, the sooner a child is exposed to learning, the better for them in terms of how they perform later in school. So that is one thing to address the problem of dropout. The question about school nutrition, the issues about scholar transport, the questions about infrastructure, the questions about curriculum reform. The Bela Bill also look at the issue of putting obligations on educators. If I'm a teacher, I've got 30 kids or 35 kids in my school, in my class, and a child doesn't attend school for 2 days without any reason. It's my responsibility as an educator to find out why is the child not in school. And similarly, there are obligations on parents to make sure that their children go to school. There's also the question about the school leaving age or the compulsory age from 15 to 18. We know that the majority of young people drop out between those ages. And by lifting the compulsory age, it also enables us to make sure that more of our young people have matric and are able to obtain matric and deal with those issues. So I think I mean, it's a bit disingenuous to now at this point in time raise all of those issues when in fact there are other processes that deal with it. And as a party, they should be aware of it, that's represented and has been represented in Parliament. But also secondly, that there has been a very extensive process. And as I say, it's been the last 10 years of looking at the education reform.
So let's look at the 5, if you want to call it that, were areas of misconception which you try to clear out. You call them myths and what is fact around the Bela Bill. One, this matter of the mandatory grade R, right? The DA is saying, good and well, we support that, make it mandatory. However, we can't afford to do that. One, it needs 12 billion rands to implement. And therefore, the fear is that this is now going to cut on the school nutrition program, is going to cut on the learner transport program. Is that just a mere misconception, or there's truth to that?
Okay, so at the moment, as I said earlier, about 97% of children of the age of 6 years are already in some form of ECD. By making it compulsory, the obligation is therefore on the state to make sure that you have sufficient teachers, that you have a proper curriculum for all of that ECD and also the infrastructure. Now, it means that there needs to be public investment in ECD, and the obligation is therefore on the state and the Department of Basic Education, the National Treasury and the government as a whole to then say, how are we going to fund this? To be able to make sure that all 6-year-olds, now that it's compulsory, are able to access grade R. So I think that it's a good thing because it means that there's an obligation on the state. It's law. It means that if, as a parent, my child can't find a place as a 6-year-old in their school to do grade R, that I can actually, approach the Human Rights Commission or take the Department of Education to court to be able to say that the laws say that it's compulsory, that 6-year-olds must be in school and access grade R, and those facilities are not available. So it places that obligation on the state to be able to ensure that this is done. I mean, Professor Metcalf in an interview recently made the point that the education budget, the 12 billion that is referred to, is in fact a relatively small portion of the entire education budget. Now, what the department will have to do, and I am sure that that's part of the planning that's gone into the Bela Bill, and the planning for that is to then be able to say that how do we phase it in, how do we address the issues of training teachers, of making sure that we budget for the salaries of ECD teachers, and secondly that the learning materials are present, and it's good for our children.
Yeah, the other two issues, I'll put them together because they speak of one thing, the admissions policies and the language policies. They're saying they do 4 things. One, they disempower SGBs to determine the direction of those policies. 2, they're going to end up targeting single language and mother tongue schools to change their language policies. 3, it's impractical for HODs to be given the responsibility of approving these admission and language policies within 14 days. They just say HODs just can't do that. 4, the appeals mechanism they're saying is inappropriate. You can't have both the HOD being the implementer of the policy and the appeals mechanism for this. And so, in a nutshell, on those 2 policies, that's what they're saying.
Yeah. I think that what we need to do is to look at the context of these 2 policies and why it was necessary to strengthen them, because they already were or is in the South African Schools Act language policies as well as the admission policies. The reality is that over the last, I think since the coming into force of the South African Schools Act, there has been numerous court cases against SGBs on exactly these issues of admission policies, where students and pupils, learners are excluded on the basis of, that we don't, you speak a different language, we teach isiXhosa or Afrikaans or whatever, and therefore we don't have space for you. And there's been numerous court cases, as I said. So part of what the Bela Bill is trying to do is to provide some form of clarity around what are the procedures for the SGBs to determine their admission policies and their language policies, and then to send it to approval. And let me just make a point around language policies, because one of the other things that the Bela Bill is also doing is to look at how do we, acknowledging the fact that we live in a multilingual society. And part of living in a multilingual society is understanding that mother tongue education is very important to contributed towards learners' progress in schools. And therefore, if you have a child coming to school and they've been taught in English, but they have a different mother tongue at school, of course it will impact on the child's educational progress. So from an education perspective, it's important that there needs to be oversight over this issue of, ensuring that all children have access to education in the communities where they lived, or the schools that their parents want to send them to. And we have so many different cases of people being excluded. And, as I say, a lot of the cases against SGBs has been exactly around this issue of excluding people on the basis of language. South Africa is a multilingual country. And multilingualism by its very nature is very difficult.
Yeah.
And therefore, part of what we need to do as what government needs to do is to make sure that it provides the best kind of policies that will enable learners to learn in an environment that's conducive towards them learning. And that means introducing multilingualism and enabling learners to be taught in the language of their choice. Now, what the complaint is that it's going to impact on single language schools, in particular, talking about single language Afrikaans schools. And the reality is that we are a multilingual society, and I think that all of us need to accept that we live in a multilingual society. And therefore, when we talk about public resources, and schools are public resources, that we need to look at how do we make provision for the fact that in a particular community, you are going to have children who speak different languages, and therefore the education system must make provision for that. So I think that's really what is at the nub of it, the fact that there are people in our country who still haven't accepted that we live in a multilingual society and that we therefore have to make provision for everybody. I mean, and we should remind ourselves, today is the 12th of September, the day when Steve Biko was killed in 1977. People lost their life for fighting against the imposition of a single language on everybody. We're now trying to make provision for recognizing that we are a multilingual society, and the very people that were responsible for the death of Steve Biko in 1977 are now saying that no, we want to continue with doing business as usual. Yeah. The questions about the procedure of how do we how the department then approve the admission policies, approve the language policies are set out in a little bit more detail within the Bela Bill than what it was in the South African Schools Act. But the fact that you now have a law means that there's not just an obligations on responsibilities of SGBs to develop their policy, to have a transparent approach towards it, to take in consideration the community, the feeder community that they're responsible for.
Yeah.
But there's also an obligation on government to make sure in the department that they also fulfill their obligations to, set up proper structures to ensure that the process does not take too long,
All right.
that it's fair, that it's transparent, and that the appeals processes are also fair and transparent.
Fébé Potgieter, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. There would still be much more to cover, but because of time, we leave it there for tonight. ANC NEC member Fébé Potgieter there, who was part also of the negotiating of the GNU, but her views on the Bela Bill and why it shouldn't be a make or break of the government of national unity. Are these signs of a crack in the GNU? What are your thoughts? 072-110-5584. Drop us an X at Newzroom 405. In Focus continues shortly.